Welcome to our segment on Samba shares. So unlike RAID, there's really not a whole lot to talk about as far as an introduction to Samba. Samba enables you to create shares of files and directories on your Ubuntu Linux server that you can then share with Windows clients, other folks using Windows machines. It's pretty basic, but that isn't to say that Samba is simple. There are some complex configurations and parameters that can be set, but for the scope of this video, we're really just interested in creating a very basic Samba share so that you get the fundamentals down and you have a little bit of experience under your belt working with Samba. After you understand the basics of creating a share, then you can get into more of the complex parameters and creating these highly nuanced types of file servers where you have multiple Windows users accessing the shares that you've set up on your Linux server. The first thing that I would like for you to do is test whether or not Samba is installed and running on your machine. It should be. If you followed my installation video, then Samba should have been installed at the time that you installed Ubuntu server. And so by running service Samba status, you can see the status of the Samba service. In this case, you can see that both NMBD and SMBD are running. Okay, those are the two components of Samba, and they do different things, but we don't need to know about that, so we're just going to gloss over that and move right on to our configuration file. Open up etc. samba smb.conf. You've obviously seen these files before. The conf files, the conf files, are configuration files. So we've opened up here our Samba configuration file. Now, you'll notice that the vast majority of this configuration file begins with either the pound symbol, or sometimes referred to as the hash symbol, or a semicolon, and those serve similar but slightly different purposes. The pound symbol or the hash symbol is pretty much universal with a Linux or a Unix type of system, that whatever follows on that line will be a comment. So it will not be an active part of the configuration. It's merely there for you to read when you open up the file. You will then see certain lines, as we have here, that have a semicolon in front. Now, what's the difference? Well, a semicolon is going to denote a line that is commented out, a line that is not a part of the configuration as well. However, this sample Samba configuration file is making a distinction between a pure comment, as you see here, which is information for you to read, and default settings for Samba. So in other words, the interface's default setting is right here. Unless you remove the semicolon and change the parameters, or you change the setting. So anytime that you see a semicolon, here's a few more, then that is telling you that this is the default setting. So without specifying anything further, that is the parameter that is going to be automatically used by Samba. Now, I've already come in here and I've added a basic share called hello. You add a share in the Samba configuration file by typing the name in brackets, as I've done here with hello. So I've created a share that is called hello, and then I told it using path equals where the files and directories physically reside. We'll change that to SDB. Where the files and directories physically reside on my server that I want people on Windows to be able to access using the share name. And then I've gone ahead and set browsable to yes here. Now, before we jump right in showing you how this operates on a Windows system, I want to let you know that you can erase a large amount of this data in the smb.conf file. However, I find it very helpful to leave that information there for reference. After all, that's why it's there. The comments are there for you to read if you have a question about something in the configuration file, and those lines which begin with a semicolon are there so that you know what these default settings are. And if you're okay with the default settings, you don't have to specify those settings when you're setting up your share. That being said, I have left this information in here. You're welcome to delete it if you find it cumbersome. It will not affect your configuration. Anything which begins with the hash symbol or a semicolon will not affect your Samba configuration. Okay, so if you find it cumbersome, you don't have to leave it in here. I am going to leave it in here because I prefer to have that information. And of course, there are other things you could do. You could save this as a sample configuration file and then set up your configuration file cleanly without all this information. I know that there are different ways of doing that. My preference is just to leave it in my actual configuration file. Now, before we move forward with any more of the configuration, let's make sure that we add users to Samba, an often overlooked step. Sudo smb passwd is the command we'll use to add a user to Samba, and we'll use the A option to specify that we are in fact adding a user. I'm going to add the user Bob, and I'm also going to add another user called Liam. These are users that I already have on the Linux system, but I'm now adding them to Samba. Now let's move back on to our configuration file. Okay, all of that being said, let's jump into seeing how this share is going to function on a Windows system. So over here in my other window, I am in the Mount SDB directory, so you can see some files that I've created in here in the SDB directory. My hello share is going to allow people on Windows systems to access this data over here, physically residing in Mount SDB, because I've set the path here as Mount SDB. I've also set the browsable option to yes. Browsable is going to allow what we call in a Windows system network discovery. It's going to allow the share to be discovered or to be found if somebody's simply browsing the network. So pulling up my Windows network, you can see the server here called test serve. If I double click on that, you can then see the hello share that we set up over here. And if I double click on the hello share, you will see that it's asking for credentials so that I can access that share. Now, we have a very basic share configured over here, and we'll get to further configuration so that we can actually input some credentials and get into the share, or in a certain case, you don't even have to have credentials if that's how you want to set up the share. But right now, let's just change our browsable parameter to no. By changing that to no, we will no longer be able to see the share. That is not to say that the share does not exist. Rather, as you can see here, when looking at the test server, I simply do not see it. It is no longer going to be seen by network discovery. But if we go into the server, and here you can see that, you can see this folder is empty. It does not allow us to see the hello share, but we know it's still there. And if we go up here to the address bar, and if we type in testserve/hello, you'll see that we'll get our user credential box. It is trying to access the share, and we could access the share if we had the credentials to do so. So let's move on to the guest OK parameter so that we can play around with this a little bit more. We will make the share browsable, and we will say that guest access is OK. By doing this, we will, by default, allow the nobody account on Ubuntu server to be utilized by guests to access the hello, in this case, share. So let's refresh our network. Here's our server. Remember that we have set browsable to yes, and so the share appears where it did not before when browsable is set to no. The network is allowed to discover it, and guest is set to OK. So guest access is OK, and now you can see we are not prompted for a username or password, but as a mere guest, we are capable of entering the share. Now, that being said, we can read files here on the share. However, let me open up a notepad here and save a file to the share to give you an idea of how this guest access is going to function. So you can see here that I am creating the file test34.txt. However, it is not allowing me to do that. I don't have permission to save in this location. We can change that very simply over here in our configuration file. Read only equals no. Now, additionally, I would like to let you know that you can also use writable. Writable is the same as read-only, it's simply inverted. So read-only no means writable yes. These two lines here would never appear in a configuration file because they mean the same thing. You can use whichever your preference is there. I'll be honest with you, I actually prefer writable. And so that's what I'll be using in my configuration. It's just a little more comfortable for me and what I'm used to. Okay. Now, the writable parameter is going to allow our share to become writable. Okay, we know that. But let's also specify some valid users so that we can get some credentials on this share. I'm going to specify that Bob and Liam will have access to this share. I will save the configuration file. Oh, pardon me. I want to turn guest access off. Guest OK. No, I don't think so. So what we'll do now is come back over here to our network and then remember it's browsable so we can see it. However, we will be prompted for credentials this time because guest OK is set to no. And we will be able to log in as either Bob or Liam. So here we go. Took a little while, but it came up. Let's log in as Liam. And you can see that with these parameters, browsable, yes, where I can see the share. Guest OK, no, I want somebody to have to enter credentials here. Writable, yes, and valid users, Bob and Liam. I signed in as Liam, and now you can see if I go to write into the hello share, I can do that because Liam has privileges to do so. And you can see Liam was here. These are the basics of creating Samba shares, and it doesn't have to get a whole lot more complicated than this. It depends on the organization or the company that you're working with and their specific needs, okay? One other option that is very, very useful is the hide unreadable option. Hide unreadable. Hide unreadable is not going to show me files that I do not have access to. So hide unreadable, yes, and I will write out that configuration file. So you can see now that by setting hide unreadable to yes, you no longer see the lost and found folder. And if we move this over here, hence why I have two terminal windows open here, two terminals. If we change the permissions over here, let's say sudo chmod 000.777.txt. So I'm setting 777.txt to completely restricted for everyone. Enter my root password over here so that I can do that, and look, in real time, 777 disappears. Why did it disappear? Because it was unreadable. The user would not have been able to read the file, and therefore it's simply hidden from them. This is very valuable in an organization with sensitive data. For example, where I'm currently working, we have an accounting department. We have other departments that don't need to see the same information. If you're not in the accounting department, you don't need to see the accounting information 9 times out of 10. And so we are able to not only restrict access, but we are able to make sure that people can't even see those files, so that those files are not even, they're not even an option for the user. The user cannot see the files whatsoever, since we have specified hide unreadable. Now, again, there are other parameters and other things you can set up for your Samba share, but you have the basics here of setting of how to set everything up.